Hello and welcome to the program, Sula's Big Adventures with me, Sula. This is Chapter 17 of my complete video guide to becoming an amateur astronomer. Chapter 17, Part 4, Guide to the Constellations of Summer. In Part 1, I provided an overview of the constellations, and I started with autumn, and I'll provide the link to that here and in the description below. In Part 2, I covered the constellations of winter, and Part 3 was the constellations of spring. The constellations I'll be covering in this part are Aquila, Cygnus, Delphinus, Lyra the harp, Ophiuchus the serpent bearer, Sagitta the arrow, Sagittarius the archer, Scorpius the scorpion, Serpens Cauda and Serpens Caput, Vulpecula the fox. Right now I'll go outside and I'll show you how to find the constellations, and then I'll come back in and I'll tell you about them, the legends associated with them, and objects you can see in each one with binoculars, a small telescope, and a large telescope. Well, it's summertime, so that means it doesn't get dark until about 11:30 p.m. So now I'm going to show you how to find the constellations of summer. Let's start by finding something familiar, and that would be the Big Dipper. And once we find the Big Dipper, I'll show you how to find the constellations of summer. Okay, here's the Big Dipper. It's high overhead this time of year with the handle on top of the bowl. And the two pointer stars, as you probably know, point to Polaris and the Little Dipper. And in between the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper is Draco the dragon. And in between is Draco that wraps around the Little Dipper and down below it, and then it comes up to Draco's head. This box right here is Draco's head, and that's Eltanen and Draco's head, and it points to Vega. So this is Vega and Lyra the harp, and it's one of the stars that makes up the summer triangle. Below Vega, you'll see another bright star off to the left of it. That's the end of a giant cross, and that's Deneb and Cygnus, the swan. So here's Vega and Lyra, and there's Deneb. The other end of the cross is Alberio, famous double star, and just below Alberio is a very faint constellation, Vulpecula the fox. It's just below Alberio. So there's Vega at the top of the screen, and at the bottom of the screen is Deneb. And so the third star of the summer triangle is just rising, so it doesn't look like much. There are also clouds, but it's Altair and Aquila. At the top is Vega and Lyra the harp, then Deneb and Cygnus the swan, the big cross, and down here is Altair and Aquila, and that's the summer triangle. Just above Altair is a dim constellation, Sagitta, the arrow, right here. Now let's go back to the Big Dipper, and from the handle to Arcturus, the bright yellow star in Boötes. And once you've found Arcturus, then you keep going left, and that's where you'll find Serpens Caput, this crooked line with a triangle at the top. So here's Arcturus, and here's Serpens Caput, and then Ophiuchus, and then Serpens Cauda, Next to Aquila is the beautiful little constellation Delphinus, the dolphin. Well, to see the last two constellations, you face south and look low on the horizon for the giant J, which is Scorpius, and it's blocked by that cloud. And then to the left of it will be the teapot in Sagittarius. Conditions are deteriorating, in fact. I can't even show you, but the Milky Way runs through there and up above Aquila and through Cygnus like that. Cloud's not going to move, but you can see the top of the J here, and that bright red star is Antares, and then the J goes down where the cloud is like that. So you'll just have to imagine it. Well, my laser pointer didn't die, but that cloud is not moving, so I'll have to show you on Stellarium or something. So that's how you find the constellations of summer. Now I'll tell you about them. I'll start with Serpens Caput. Serpens Caput can be found just below Corona Borealis, and it means head of the serpent. It's the only constellation having two separate parts, with the head, Serpens Caput, and the tail, Serpens Cauda, separated by Ophiuchus, who is the serpent bearer and holding a serpent. It was also a constellation that was identified by Ptolemy. The brightest star of Serpens Caput is Binoculars, which means heart of the serpent. In Serpens Caput, there's a double star, Theta Serpentis, a multiple star system with Theta 1 and Theta 2 separated by 22 arc seconds. So you can separate it with the binoculars. Serpens Caput also contains the beautiful globular cluster M5, about 8 degrees southwest of Binoculars. M5 is 13 billion years old, and it's 25,000 light years away at magnitude 6.7. It appears as a patch of light in a pair of binoculars, and you probably will need 70 millimeter or larger, or a small telescope. It's just beyond the reach of naked eye visibility unless you're in an extremely dark place on a clear, dark night. Next to Serpens Caput, we find Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer. Ophiuchus is a large constellation that straddles the celestial equator, and it touches the ecliptic, but it was left off the zodiac for centuries. It's often depicted as a man holding a serpent on both sides of his body. It's been known as the serpent bearer from probably about 4,000 years ago. Ophiuchus is Greek for serpent bearer and is usually identified as Asclepius, the god of medicine. Asclepius was the son of Apollo and Coronis. The alpha star of Ophiuchus is Rasselhage, which is a binary star system with the two stars orbiting each other in just 8.62 years. They're too close to separate. Ophiuchus also contains the second closest star to Earth, Barnard's star, 6 light years away. It's a red dwarf, magnitude 9.5. Ophiuchus also contains IC 4665, an open cluster also known as the summer beehive. It's 1,400 light years from Earth and magnitude 5, so highly suitable for binoculars. Ophiuchus also contains several globular clusters, M10, M12, M14, M19, and M62, all 7th magnitude globular clusters and suitable for binoculars of 70 millimeter or larger. Ophiuchus contains Kepler's supernova, a supernova discovered by Johannes Kepler in 1604, the last supernova to be observed with the naked eye until SN 1987A was seen in the Large Magellanic Cloud, briefly visible in 1987. On the other side of Ophiuchus from Serpens Caput is Serpens Cauda, the tail of the serpent. In Serpens Cauda, we find IC 4756, a 5th magnitude open cluster visible in binoculars, and M16, the famous Eagle Nebula, a star cluster surrounded by nebulosity, made famous by the Hubble Space Telescope photo of it known as the Pillars of Creation. The cluster is 7th magnitude and can be seen in a small telescope or very large binoculars. A UHC filter will help bring out the nebulosity. Next to Serpens Cauda is Aquila, the eagle. Aquila is Latin for eagle and is said to represent the eagle that carried Zeus's thunderbolts. It has been known since 1200 BC as a bird, and it was one of the 48 constellations described by Ptolemy. It's on the celestial equator, and it lies along the summer Milky Way, and hence is rich in celestial objects to explore. The brightest star is Altair, one of the brightest stars in the sky, and one corner of the summer triangle, an asterism, and a bright shape visible in the northern hemisphere in summertime. Altair is magnitude 0.8, and it's 17 light years away. Aquila contains a dark nebula, B142, that's distinctive and can be seen in binoculars of 70 millimeters. It also contains a planetary nebula, NGC 6781, visible in a small telescope, and 8th magnitude open cluster, NGC 6709, that can be seen with a small telescope. Above Aquila is the small constellation Sagitta, the arrow. Sagitta is a constellation recognized since classical times and identified with many arrows of mythology, notably Cupid's arrow and also the arrow that Hercules used to strike down the eagle that was chewing on Prometheus's liver as his punishment. Sagitta is the 3rd smallest constellation and has no star brighter than magnitude 3, so it's pretty dim. But it contains M71, an 8th magnitude globular cluster, visible in a small telescope, and NGC 6886, a planetary nebula, magnitude 11, requiring an 8-inch or larger telescope. Next to Sagitta is another dim, small constellation you probably won't be able to pick out, Vulpecula, the fox. Vulpecula was formed in 1690 by German-Polish astronomer Johannes Hevelius. It has no bright stars and can be difficult to make out, and it only contains 2 notable objects, M27, the famous Dumbbell Nebula, an 8th magnitude planetary nebula, 980 light years away and visible in 10 by 50 binoculars, and the asterism known as the coat hanger, or CR399. North of Vulpecula is Cygnus the Swan, my favorite constellation. Cygnus is a large constellation that looks like a giant cross, and it's often referred to as our Northern Cross. In one story, Cygnus is Orpheus, the hero of Thrace, who sang and played his lyre so beautifully that wild animals would come to hear him play. In one myth, Orpheus is transported to the sky as a swan so that he can be near his lyre. In another myth, Cygnus is Zeus in the disguise of a swan, the disguise he took on in order to seduce Leda of Sparta. Cygnus stretches across the Milky Way and is rich in star clusters and nebulae. The brightest star of Cygnus is Deneb, Arabic for tail, and hence it's the tail of the swan. Deneb is magnitude 1.3, and it makes up 1 point of the summer triangle. Deneb is 25 times more massive and 60,000 times more luminous than our sun. At the foot of the cross, you'll find one of the most famous and most beautiful double stars in the night sky, Albireo. At 34 arcseconds apart, the 2 stars can be easily split with binoculars. One star is golden at magnitude 3, and the other is blue and it's magnitude 5. Cygnus has another well-known double star, 61 Cygni. 2 stars orbit each other every 650 years and are separated by 30 arcseconds, so it can be also split with a small telescope and even binoculars. Cygnus also contains the famous North America Nebula, NGC 7000, a giant cloud of nebulosity that's so large it's hard to see in a telescope. It's 4 times the diameter of the full moon. It can be seen with 7 by 50 binoculars and with your naked eye on a clear, dark night with no moon in a very dark place. There's also M39, an open star cluster visible in binoculars and possibly the naked eye from a dark sky sight. Cygnus also contains the famous Veil Nebula, NGC 6960, 6992, and 6995. That's a supernova remnant. To see the nebula, you need at least a 6-inch telescope, though. Also, you'll find the blinking planetary nebula, NGC 6826. It has a bright central star, but if you stare at the nebula, it will disappear. And there's also M29, a small open cluster that can be resolved into individual stars with 15 by 70 binoculars. And finally, Cygnus contains a dark nebula, LDN 906, also known as B348, and also known as the Northern Coal Sack, a region where interstellar dust obscures our view of the Milky Way. This dark patch of the sky can be seen in 50mm binoculars. If you've been able to find Aquila and Cygnus so far, then you should be able to see the third star that makes up the summer triangle, and that would be Vega in Lyra, the harp. Lyra is a beautiful constellation that resembles a harp. The lyre was given by Apollo to his son Orpheus, who played it so beautifully that it calmed wild beasts. Orpheus was heartbroken when his wife Eurydice died, so he descended into the underworld with the consent of the gods to release her as long as he did not look at her on the return journey. Well, he was couldn't resist, and unfortunately he was too impatient and glanced at Eurydice before getting out of Hades, and Eurydice was sent back to hell forever. Orpheus was then torn to pieces by a group of women after ignoring their advances. Zeus felt sorry for the two and reunited them and placed the harp into the heavens along with Orpheus. Lyre has the famous double star Epsilon Lyrae. Any binoculars will show the two 5th magnitude stars, Epsilon 1 and Epsilon 2. But both of those stars are also double stars separated by 3 arc seconds. A 4-inch or bigger telescope at 100 times magnification is required to split these two close stars again. Lyre also contains the famous Ring Nebula M57, a planetary nebula that actually looks like a ring. You can see it with a small telescope. Just to the east of Aquila is the tiny but beautiful constellation Delphinus, the dolphin. It's been thought of as a dolphin since ancient times. In one myth, on the advice of a dolphin, the mermaid Amphitrite agreed to marry Poseidon, whom she had been trying to escape. And Poseidon was so happy with the little dolphin that he placed him among the stars. I have always loved just looking at this pretty little constellation, but inside it you will find NGC 6934, a globular cluster that can be seen in binoculars. Now if we face south, low on the horizon, we'll find a giant J, Scorpius the scorpion, that really does look like a scorpion. Scorpius is part of the zodiac, and in some versions of Greek mythology, it's the scorpion that killed Orion. Long before the Greeks, the Sumerians knew this constellation as a scorpion 5,000 years ago. Scorpius lies along the Milky Way and is rich in celestial treasures. Near the top of the J is a very red star, Antares, which is Greek for rival of Mars. To the Romans, this star was Cor Scorpionis, heart of the scorpion. And to the Chinese, it was Hua Hua, or fire star, and marked the heart of a dragon. Antares is a red supergiant, 700 times larger than our sun. If it were our sun, it would engulf the orbit of Mars. Scorpius's beta star is a double star of 2.6 and 4.9 magnitudes, separated by 13.7 arc seconds, and possible to resolve with 50mm binoculars or a small telescope. Another easy binocular object in Scorpius is M4, a globular cluster in the same field of view as Antares, so easy to find. And there's also M6, the butterfly cluster, a large, bright, open cluster visible to the naked eye. M7, another large, bright, open cluster visible to the naked eye, and best seen in binoculars due to its size. Also, the bright open cluster NGC 6231, best seen in binoculars or low power in a telescope, and also M80, a small bright globular cluster that can be seen in binoculars, but only resolved into individual stars with a 10-inch telescope. And finally, just east of Scorpius, you'll find the asterism known as the teapot, or what I call a house with smoke coming out of the chimney. And that is part of the constellation Sagittarius, the archer. It's also part of the zodiac and is ostensibly a centaur, half man, half horse. It's depicted as holding a drawn bow and is thought to be created to assist Jason and the Argonauts as they sailed on the ship Argo. Sagittarius is also located on the Milky Way and is a treasure chest of celestial objects. At the top of the charts has to be M8, the Lagoon Nebula, a spectacular nebula visible to the naked eye on a clear, dark night, inside of which is the star cluster NGC 6530. I never tire of looking at this awesome nebula on summer evenings. It's a showstopper if you have guests over who would like to look through your telescope. In Sagittarius, you'll also find the very large globular cluster M22, known as the Great Sagittarius Star Cluster. Its magnitude 6.5. It's 10,000 light years away and can be seen in binoculars, but really shines in an 8-inch telescope, which will resolve its many stars. M23 is another spectacular cluster with over 100 stars in an area the size of the moon. It's spectacular in binoculars. 1.5 degrees northwest of the Lagoon Nebula is M20, the Trifid Nebula. The Trifid can be seen in binoculars, but in order to see the dark lanes that separate the nebula, you'll need a 6-inch or larger telescope. Also in Sagittarius is my favorite nebula, M17, the Swan Nebula, also known as the Omega Nebula. It can be seen in binoculars, but is stunning in a large telescope. Using an O3 filter really brings it to life. See if you can make out the lake the swan lands on. And then there's M24, the Sagittarius star cloud, a bright patch of light, easily visible to the naked eye. It's perfect for 10 by 50 binoculars, which will reveal a great deal of detail. There are many other objects to explore in this rich area of the sky, but I'll end here. And that concludes my guide to the constellations of summer. I'll see you soon. Until then, get outside and find some constellations and enjoy the night sky. Dark skies forever. Sula, signing off.